Hey, it's all about automation, and this is Gary Mintchell, Editor-in-Chief of Automation World Magazine, back for another video essay. For some of you, a podcast essay. I save it both ways. And did some research for my feature article for the September issue of Automation World, and something that's concerned me like forever is making manufacturing strategic to an enterprise. I grew up at a time where companies were actually built by engineers, and they had an idea for a product and how to make the product, and the product that would serve a useful purpose for people. You know, like Charles Kettering noticed people breaking their arms and getting killed cranking a car, so he invented an electric self-starter, things like that. And eventually, bean counters kind of took over. I remember the first bean counter that came to a company I worked for. I was in product development, and a guy came, and instead of being an ancient historian, he thought he should be running the company. And so they make decisions based on numbers and spreadsheets rather than products and customers. Gee, guess what happened? Anyway, I did a lot of research, like what's going on, and do we have a manufacturing resurgence, or how can we? And essentially, I boiled it down to, for this thing, for four different ways of avoiding manufacturing decline, is what I'll call it. And some of the things I found, and you'll find this article in its entirety early to mid-September at automationworld.com. But one thing, I had a really interesting interview with a fellow from Morocco. Now, we all know about China investing in their manufacturing because they see that as a real key thing for building their country and their economy. You know, in the United States, sometimes we wonder if people see that as a key thing, or maybe they should just do financial engineering, which we could see what that happened. But anyway, so we've seen China do that. Well, I talked to this person from Morocco, and he says Morocco is very interested in building a manufacturing economy, an industrial economy. Right now, they're a materials economy. What does a materials economy mean? It means foreigners come in, dig up all their resources, and then ship it off. You know, whatever that resource might be. In some countries, it's, you know, copper or steel or iron or manganese or whatever it is. And we all know that those kind of economies just haven't been fruitful for all the population. So Morocco has been big in this, and they invested in a number of things. So the country actually has some funds, and like they have a pension fund. The pension fund invests, not unheard of kind of investment. And this is an interesting story of a high technology wafer fab in Morocco, which really isn't that far from Europe. So it's pretty close to shipping to customers in Europe. But these days, they've got customers in China, customers in the United States. It's all over. Interesting story, and it's a lesson we can learn in any country. The United States and Western Europe are pretty industrialized and developed, but sometimes we forget that we need to be investing as a country or a society in manufacturing to keep building all this up. Common theme of mine, but anyway, watch some of the countries that want to advance and they want to copy us, and we're thinking, wow, we're past that. No, it doesn't work that way. Another thing, when I interviewed some people, one person is not an executive anymore, but he moved out to California to become CEO of a company. And they were doing about 25%, I believe he said, of their manufacturing in China at the time. And he was kind of looking at it, and the board of directors said, you know, shouldn't we just like move it all over there? So he started to study it. And the more he studied it, the more he came to the conclusion it doesn't make a lot of sense, because if manufacturing is too far away, it takes too long to make a product change, for one thing. So I want to change something because I need to determine a problem, but you've got 45 to 60 days of inventory on a boat, and you can't make that change, so you have to go over there, make the change over there. Eventually it gets made, it comes back over here. By the time it gets here, you've lost 2 to 3 months of satisfying customers because of the supply chain problems. There are other supply chain problems. There's costs involved, cost instead of landed cost, and that gets to be a problem. So if you do a total financial analysis of the whole thing, or as the guy said, you don't just look at the income statement or the profit and loss statement that says, okay, I've got direct material, direct cost, direct overhead, and then I've got gross margin when you subtract it from the sales price. And at one time I was a cost expert, and I did a lot of cost analysis, and I know how that works. And then I worked for a company where all of a sudden I looked at like other investments, because I was like a vice president level, and I had to look at stuff, and you determine the balance sheet and the cash flow statement. Small tool company I worked for, cash flow was king. Man, we had to manage cash flow. That was the thing. Balance sheet was weak, but if we didn't have cash, we went out of business. We didn't have cash. We went out of business. I'm an editor now. So he's just said, look at all these factors and weigh that when you're looking at expanding your supply chain. You put a lot of pressure on manufacturing when you expand that supply chain out to the limits. You've stretched that rubber band to the limits. Another thing we found out as I interviewed people is, let me use an analogy. You're going to Germany and you need to speak to some German people. Are you going to speak Chinese? Your likelihood of being understood will be, you know, kind of next to none. Maybe somebody understands something. You know, I can say ni hao, and then that's it. I don't know anymore. So the same way, operations and operations management and engineers and engineering management come in and they'll talk about, we need to improve this process. We need to buy a new machine. We need to, you know, do this to improve something. And top management says, you're not talking our language. You know, I don't hear you. What are you saying? I hear noise, but I don't hear sense. That's because you haven't spoken the language of executives. When you're speaking to executives, speak the language of executives. Those three things I talked about, you know, the P&L, the balance sheet, the cash flow statement, talk in kind of those terms. Talk in terms of investment and dollars, because they understand dollars. They don't necessarily understand tweaking a process, but they certainly do understand dollars. So talk in those kind of terms. Learn the language of management to speak to management. You will have a much better time or chance of selling manufacturing to them as an integral part of the company. And it really should be. If the company exists to make things to sell to people to satisfy their needs and wants, then you're a manufacturing company, and that should be integral. That should be a key part of what you're doing. You won't sell that unless you actually talk the language of the people you're trying to talk to. And there's one other thing that I discovered, and there's probably other tidbits in the article, and you can read the whole article, like I said, in mid-September. But another thing that's kind of interesting is more of a strategic nature, is that corporations have strategic objectives. If it's a public company, read the annual report, and it's there. And if you're in manufacturing, you should be reading that annual report and making sure that your strategic objectives align. I kind of looked at it kind of a picture like this. So align with the corporate strategic objectives. If you're doing things to support their objective, then they're going to look more favorable on you. If you think you're going your own way while they're going over this way, it's not going to work. They'll look at you once again like, I see action, but I have no clue what you're doing. So those four things were interesting things that I picked up. There's more information and examples to flesh out in the article. But once again, you know, you need like a society or a country making a decision. So I'm talking here beyond my just normal readership. But you can get involved. And our problem in the United States of politics is sometimes we've got too many conflicting ideas, and because of the way we do politics, sometimes things get bogged down as everybody tries to get their own idea. But we need to make investment in manufacturing. Top executives, study all of your financials before you make supply chain and outsourcing kinds of decisions. Make sure you're not just knee-jerking on the P&L statement, but make sure you're considering balance sheet ramifications, cash flow ramifications, customer satisfaction. Drucker said that companies exist to find customers and satisfy their needs. Are you doing that, or are you kind of like messing around with just numbers and assuming that you have customers? Speak the language of executives. When you're in operations and engineering, don't talk your language to somebody that doesn't talk your language. Talk their language. And the last thing is, and if you're in operations and engineering management, make sure that your objectives strategically align with the organization's strategic direction. When I listened to Jim Chaital talk, I just butchered his last name, but he's Vice President of North American Manufacturing for Ford. And then I went back and I looked at the Ford annual report, and he was talking about all the things manufacturing is doing, and it aligned perfectly with what Alan Mulally and Bill Ford were saying were the strategic objectives of Ford. They're all aligning together. They're moving the whole company forward. You know, and that sort of thing is a beautiful thing. So this is Gary Mintchell, Editor-in-Chief, Automation World Magazine. You can find my blog at Gary Mintchell's Feed Forward, all one word, .com. And you can find this article at the September issue online at automationworld.com. Thanks. Have a good day.